March 11th, 2026. And there is a place in Rockville Cemetery in Lynbrook, Nassau County, New York, where a woman named Sabrina Jackson has been buried since 1983. She was 23 years old when she died. She was a mother. She was murdered. Her killer was never caught. Her case was never solved. And for over 40 years, her grave has sat in that cemetery in relative quiet, known only to those who loved her and those who knew her story. Until a 21-year-old from Atlanta found a photograph of it, posted it to his Instagram story, and sent it to millions of people in a single moment of rage that has now become one of the most discussed, most debated, and most morally complicated moments in the recent history of hip-hop culture. What they found when they looked at that grave was not just a headstone. What they found was the epicenter of a story that goes deeper than any beef, deeper than any diss track, but deeper than any Instagram post or versus battle or snitching allegation. What they found was the life of a woman whose death shaped one of the most powerful men in the history of this industry. And the fact that her resting place was turned into content, into ammunition, into a prop in a social media argument about a music battle that never happened, is why this story has not left the internet since February 22nd and why on March 11th, 2026. Yet it is still the conversation that everyone in this culture cannot stop having. The world was not prepared for the moment King Harris pulled up that photograph. It was not prepared for what it represented. It was not prepared for what it said about where the lines are in 2026 and who is willing to cross them. And now, nearly 3 weeks later, the gravity of that moment is still pulling everything toward it. Before we go any deeper, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, yet and hit that bell icon so you never miss a single update on this story. Now let's get into everything. To understand why that grave and that photograph carry the weight they do, you have to understand the full story of Sabrina Jackson. Not the abbreviated version, not just the footnote in 50 Cent's biography. The full human story of a young woman who was trying to survive and who was taken from her son in the most violent and unjust way imaginable. Because that is what was in that photograph that King Harris posted. Not just a headstone, a life, a murder, an unsolved crime. A child who grew up in the shadow of that crime and built everything he ever built, partly in response to the absence it created. Sabrina Jackson was 15 years old when she had her son Curtis. 15. A teenager in South Jamaica, Queens, in the mid-1970s. A neighborhood shaped by poverty and the drug trade and the specific kind of daily survival that most people in other parts of America never had to think about. She raised her son alone. His father was not present in any meaningful way. It was just Sabrina and Curtis. She was his everything, and he was hers. She did not have many options. She did not have the kind of safety net that makes hard choices easier. She made the choices she made to keep her son fed and clothed and present in her life. So she sold drugs on Old South Road, which was the reality of the economy available to her in that neighborhood at that time. She became known on those streets. She was not invisible. She had presence. Her son has spoken about the men who came around his mother's world, the ones with Cadillacs and expensive jewelry, the ones who represented a version of success that the legitimate economy was not offering anyone in South Jamaica, Queens in 1975. And then in 1983, she was gone. Yet Curtis Jackson was 8 years old. His mother was found unresponsive in her apartment. The apartment had been set on fire. Investigators believed the circumstances were not accidental. They believed someone had drugged her, left her unconscious, turned on the bow, and set the fire. They believed she had been targeted. She was 23 years old. She was a young woman who had been doing what she could to survive, and someone decided she should not survive anymore. No one was ever arrested. No one was ever charged. The case went cold. The killer, whoever they were, walked free. And the 8-year-old boy she had been raising alone was handed to his grandparents and told that the person who was his whole world was gone, and the person who took her would never be held accountable. Curtis Jackson moved into a house in South Jamaica that he shared with 8 other relatives. He grew up in the same neighborhood where his mother had operated. He's surrounded by the same streets and the same culture and the same absence of anything that could adequately fill the space she had left. He has said that every time something went wrong after she died, He would think that if his mother were there, it would not be like that. That thought, that reflex, that continuous return to the presence she should have had in his life shaped everything. It shaped his anger. It shaped his drive. It shaped his relationship to fear and to weakness and to vulnerability. He has said she was his mother and his father both. He has said he did not know when it was okay to be emotional and when it was not because she was tough and she was all he had and then she was not there. He started dealing drugs at 12. He started boxing at 11. He got shot 9 times in 2000 in the parking lot of a recording studio and survived. He built an empire from South Jamaica, Queens, us that eventually reached Broadway productions and Netflix film roles, and a television production company with shows seen globally. The straight line from Sabrina Jackson's murder in 1983 to everything Curtis Jackson built runs through a loss that was never healed and a crime that was never solved. She is buried at Rockville Cemetery in Lynbrook, Nassau County, New York. And that is the grave that appeared on King Harris's Instagram story on February 22nd, 2026. Now, to understand how that photograph ended up there, you have to trace every step of a conflict that began not with rage, but with a conversation about a music battle, a celebration that was supposed to happen and did not, a plan that was supposedly agreed upon and then denied, a private moment that became a public humiliation, that became a personal war, that became something that crossed over from hip-hop beef into human tragedy. I had been pushing for a versus battle with 50 Cent for years. But the desire was real and the logic was sound. Both men emerged in the early 2000s. Both had massive catalogs. Both had been defining voices of their respective corners of the culture. A versus between them, a live streaming event where the two would play their greatest records side by side and let the culture judge the legacy, would have been one of the most watched events in the format's history. I wanted it. He had been saying so publicly for years and privately for even longer. He went on $1 million worth of game with Gilly the Kid and Wallow and laid out what he says happened. He and 50 Cent had been together in Los Angeles on real business. Television pitches, movie discussions, two moguls from different worlds finding common ground in the entertainment industry beyond music. And during those conversations, T.I. says the versus came up. He says 50 was receptive. He says they discussed the logistics. He says the plan was clear. With I would raise it publicly first, and 50 would confirm it when the moment came. That was the agreement. That was what T.I. understood to have been settled between them. And then when T.I. followed through, when he went on Nightcap Live with Shannon Sharpe and Chad Ochocinco and said plainly that he had reached out and that 50 was ducking the smoke, 50 Cent performed confusion. He acted like the conversation had never happened. He acted like he had no idea what T.I. was talking about. And in that gap, into T.I.'s respect for Curtis Jackson evaporated. He said on the podcast that he did not want to stand on a stage with 50 Cent. He said the versus would never happen. He said what 50 had done was not just a refusal, it was a specific kind of disrespect that came from a man pretending a private agreement had never been made. The history between these two men goes back further than the versus conversation. I was caught in possession of machine guns by federal agents and received what many in the culture considered a surprisingly light sentence. Eyebrows were raised, including 50 Cent. He had referenced the situation in music years earlier, suggesting on a track that I may have cooperated with the law enforcement to secure a lighter outcome. That underlying tension never fully resolved. It lived in the space between them for years, waiting for something to reactivate it. The versus situation was that something. 50 Cent responded to T.I.'s public call-out the way he always responds. Not with a statement, not with a fine-tune. He went to Instagram and started digging. He posted the Crime Stoppers commercial T.I. had filmed in 2010, a public service announcement in which T.I. asked people with knowledge of crimes to report it to law enforcement. He posted footage of T.I. testifying in a courtroom in a 2008 case. He let the content sit in public and let the audience connect the dots he was drawing without having to state the accusation directly. Then he went to a comment section and typed 2 words. King Rat. In hip-hop, that phrase is not an insult. It is an indictment of character, of loyalty, of everything a man claims to be. For T.Y., who has spent his entire career defending his authenticity, being labeled King Rat in public was a provocation that demanded a response. T.I. responded with force. He said only one of them was a real rat in real life, and that he had 50's paperwork and his own transcript was available online. He told 50 to get in the box or stay quiet and live in fear. He called him soft. He said 50 had lost his respect. Two veterans using the vocabulary this culture has always used when the conflict is real and the stakes are personal. Both watching each other carefully, both calculating. And then 50 Cent made the decision that changed who was in this fight. He posted a photograph of Tamika Tiny Harris, T.I.'s wife, unflattering, public, captioned with a message telling T.I. to keep his name out of his mouth. The reaction from fans was immediate and divided. Some of 50's own followers pushed back. One person wrote that Tiny was one of their icons and that this was not funny. Another wrote that beef should stay between men. Another told 50 directly that he was too big for that kind of move. Plus, even people who enjoy 50 Cent's trolling and follow his conflicts with genuine enthusiasm recognize that posting a living woman's photograph to mock her in a dispute she never joined was a different kind of act than anything that had come before it in this particular beef. Tiny Harris is a Grammy-winning artist and a founding member of Escape. She has her own career and her own legacy. She had not said a word about 50 Cent. She was not a participant. And 50 posted her photograph anyway, because going through the family applies pressure that going after the person directly cannot replicate. He knew that. He has always known that. I responded in the comments with composure, firm, controlled. He ended his response with his own brand hashtag. He was keeping his dignity while making his position clear. He did not go after 50's family. He did not reach for anything personal. He kept it between them. But I was not the only person in the Harris household watching 50 Cent's Instagram that night. Someone younger was watching too. Someone who had grown up on camera on the family's reality show, every stage of his life documented for a national audience. Someone whose protective instinct for his mother operates at a temperature that has no calculation built into it. Someone who is 21 years old and had never developed the kind of armor that 2 decades in this industry builds in a person. Yet King Harris saw that photograph of his mother, and he did not wait. He grabbed his phone, he pressed record, and the decisions he made in the minutes that followed have defined this story ever since. He went to the comments section under 50's post and wrote 4 words. Where your mama at? He knew exactly what those words meant. He knew that 50 Cent's mother was deceased. He knew she had died when Curtis was a child. He used that knowledge deliberately as the first move in what would become a sustained and escalating attack. But he did not stop at the comment. He went to his Instagram stories and kept going. He said 50 was posting his mama when 50's mama was dead. He said his mama was a legend. He said he would say every word of it to 50 Cent's face. He recorded himself saying these things in a car, the camera closed, the energy high, the anger visible in every word. And then he went further. He posted an image of a generic tombstone with the caption asking where 50's mama was. And then he went further still. He posted what appears to be an actual photograph of Sabrina Jackson's gravesite at Rockville Cemetery in Lynbrook, Nassau County, New York. The resting place of a woman who was murdered in 1983 when her son was 8 years old. Posted on Instagram for the world to see. The internet stopped. Not in the way it stops for a diss track or a clapback or a viral moment. When it stopped in the way it stops when something crosses a threshold that most people did not even realize they were standing near until someone crossed it. The blogs had it within the hour. Raindrop Media posted the clips on X. Complex ran it. Worldstar had it. All hip-hop covered it. And the reaction that came in was not the reaction of an audience that had just seen someone win a beef. It was the reaction of an audience that had just seen something they could not entirely put into words but could feel immediately and viscerally. People chose sides. Some said King Harris had every right to defend his mother the same way 50 had attacked her publicly and aggressively. If 50 was going to bring mothers into the conversation, he should have been prepared for this. He opened the door. He set the terms. King was playing by the rules 50 established. That was one position, and it had real support. But the other position was harder to dismiss. That whatever 50 Cent did to provoke the response, whatever line he crossed by posting Tiny's photograph, the act of finding and posting a murdered woman's gravesite, the actual physical location in the earth where a specific person who died violently and unjustly is buried, is not a proportional response to anything. It is not a louder version of the same act. It is a different kind of act entirely. It involves a real location, a real body, a real death, a real wound that has never healed. And using all of that as content in a social media argument about a versus that never happened is something that most of the people watching could not fully reconcile with any version of acceptable behavior in a beef. 50 Cent's response was the LOL, the Pepe the Frog meme, 3 letters in a cartoon. After everything King Harris posted, and after the rant in the tombstone and the actual gravesite photograph and the court documents and the domestic violence references and all of it, 50 Cent posted a frog meme and typed LOL. That is not the response of a man who did not feel what King Harris said. That is the response of a man who understood immediately what weapon he had just been handed and was deciding in real time how to use it. The indifference was not real. The performance of indifference was tactical. Boy, it made King Harris look like a person who had swung as hard as he could and landed on something that did not move. It made the internet ask whether King had actually hurt 50 or whether he had only exposed himself. It positioned 50 as the calm one and King as the one who had gone too far, regardless of what 50 had done to provoke it. 50 did not stop at the meme. He posted a graphic made by a YouTuber featuring photographs of King and Tiny, together with the caption that God does not like ugly. He continued to signal boost content that attacked the Harris family. He promoted his Broadway production of August Wilson's Joe Turner's Come and Gone, opening April 25th, with language in the caption that people widely read as a multi-directional insult aimed at King and Tiny simultaneously. He was never not working. He was building a response layer by layer while performing indifference in public. King Harris kept going. He posted about 50's 2013 domestic abuse trial. He posted about 50's 2000 shooting. He brought up 50's history with Lil' Kim. He dropped Made Man on February 24th, a full diss track on streaming platforms with a music video snippet on social media. He posted what he claimed were FBI documents showing 50 had cooperated with federal investigators in the 2009 Lodi Mac murder case. He was trying everything. He was exhausting every piece of the archive he could access and putting it all in public. But here's the thing about fighting 50 Cent with his own history. 50 Cent has survived every single piece of that history in real time. He has been through the court cases and the shooting and the public humiliations and the business failures and the tabloid scandals and every other moment in the archive King was pulling from. He has already metabolized all of it. The scar tissue from surviving those things is part of what makes him impossible to wound with receipts. You cannot hurt a man with reminders of things that he has already walked through and rebuilt from. You can only remind him of his resilience. I handled his side of this the right way. He went to the studio. He recorded War in the Right One. He channeled the conflict into Kill the King, his final album, his farewell statement to a career that has defined an era of hip-hop. He turned the beef into art. He let the music be the response. That is the version of conflict this culture was built on, and the version that produces something that outlasts the moment that created it. But the moment that this story will be remembered for, the image that sits at the center of everything, is not a diss track, and it is not a social media post, and it is not a meme. It is a grave. Rockville Cemetery in Lynbrook, Nassau County, New York. A headstone bearing the name Sabrina Jackson, a young woman who was born in 1960 and died in 1983, who was a mother and a survivor and a person trying to make a life in a world that did not make it easy for her, who was murdered at 23 years old and whose killer was never identified and never prosecuted, who has been in that ground for over 40 years while her son built one of the most improbable careers in the history of American music and carried the absence of her with him through every part of it. That is what was in the photograph. That is what was in the Instagram story. That is what King Harris posted. And on March 11th, 2026, nearly 3 weeks after that post went up, the conversation about what it means and what it says and what it reveals about the state of this culture is still happening. Not just in the hip-hop spaces, in broader conversations about what is acceptable in a conflict between public figures, about what the internet has normalized in terms of how we treat the dead and the grief of the living. We're talking about what it means when a 21-year-old who grew up watching his family navigate public scrutiny reaches for the most extreme weapon he can find in a moment of anger and does not think about who that weapon was before it became a weapon. Sabrina Jackson was not a character in 50 Cent's story. She was a person. She was a young woman who had a son and who tried to take care of that son and who was murdered before she had the chance to watch him become anything. Well, she never knew what Curtis Jackson would become. She never heard "Get Rich or Die Trying." She never saw him on a television screen or a Broadway marquee or a Forbes list. She was gone at 23, and she has been in that cemetery in Nassau County ever since. And when King Harris found the photograph of her resting place and posted it to his Instagram story, he made her grave into content. He made her death into a point scored in an argument about a versus. Because he made the most private and permanent fact of Curtis Jackson's life into something that 200,000 people could screenshot and share and react to. That is what they found at 50 Cent's mother's grave after King Harris's video. They found the weight of an unsolved murder. They found the gravity of a child growing up without the parent who was murdered. They found the specific kind of wound that does not close over time because there is no justice attached to it. No resolution, no accounting. In just an absence that has been present in everything Curtis Jackson has ever done. And they found it because a 21-year-old in Atlanta decided in a moment of rage that it was fair game, that it was a card to play, that it was something that could be used. The questions this story has raised are not comfortable ones. They are not the kind of questions that have clean answers. Did 50 Cent start it by posting Tiny's photograph? Yes. Yet was 50 Cent's decision to post Tiny's photograph a violation of a boundary that most people in this culture recognize? Yes. Does that violation justify what came back? That is where the conversation becomes genuinely difficult. Because the thing about invoking a murdered woman's grave is that it does not stay inside the rules of any conflict, hip-hop or otherwise. It reaches past the rules into something that belongs to grief, injustice, and loss. And those things cannot be proportional responses to anything because they do not exist on the same scale as disrespect. They exist on the scale of human tragedy, and human tragedy does not make fair ammunition. 50 Cent has not gone to Rockville Cemetery. He has not made a public statement about seeing his mother's grave posted on social media. He posted a frog meme and moved on to promoting his Broadway show. That composure, yes, that apparent ability to absorb the worst possible thing someone could say about the worst thing that ever happened to him and respond with 3 letters and a cartoon is either the most remarkable display of emotional discipline in this entire story or the most carefully maintained performance of it. Either way, it tells you something about who Curtis Jackson is and how he learned to be that person. He learned to be that person in a house in South Jamaica, Queens. And after they told him his mother was gone and the world expected him to keep moving. And he kept moving. He has never stopped moving. And whatever response he is assembling to what King Harris posted, it is being assembled in the same spirit that has assembled every response in his career. Methodically, patiently, with full awareness of the terrain and full confidence in the outcome. The grief of an 8-year-old boy who lost his mother to a fire set by someone who was never caught is not something that belongs in a beef about a versus. It is not something that should have a caption under it on Instagram. It is not something that should be screenshotted and shared and argued over in comment sections. It is the kind of grief that belongs in the private space where a person carries the defining wound of their life and learns over the course of decades, how to build around it even when it cannot be healed. And King Harris, in a moment of rage, pulled that grief out of the private space and posted it for the world to see. And the world saw it. And the world is still talking about it on March 11th, 2026. And nothing about that conversation feels finished. Not even close. Because this is not just a story about a beef between a mogul and a 21-year-old. But this is not just a story about a versus that never happened, or a photograph of someone's wife, or a diss track called Made Man. This is a story about what we as a culture are willing to treat as content, what we are willing to hand to the algorithm, what we are willing to turn into engagement, in views, in hot takes, in comment sections. It is a story about the gap between the performance of toughness and the reality of grief. It is a story about a woman who died in 1983 and whose grave is in Lynbrook, New York, and whose name is Sabrina Jackson, and who deserved to rest in peace in a way that what happened on February 22nd, 2026 did not allow. That is what they found at 50 Cent's mother's grave. That is what left the internet speechless. Not because nobody had ever said anything cruel in a hip-hop beef before, but because this time the cruelty had a specific address, a real location, a body in the ground. A murder without justice, and a son who built his life on the foundation of that loss, and who, for all his composure and all his LOLs and all his frog memes, has had to sit with the fact that his mother's grave appeared on the Instagram story of a 21-year-old who barely knows his name. There is also a dimension to this story that goes beyond the individuals involved, beyond the Harris family and beyond Curtis Jackson. It is that has been building in the background of every conversation about this beef since February 22nd. It is a conversation about what this culture has been teaching its youngest generation about how conflict is conducted. King Harris is 21 years old. He grew up in a specific kind of environment, one where cameras were always present, yet where his family's conflicts and triumphs and private moments were all visible to a national audience through the reality television show that documented their lives. He grew up understanding, on some level, that the way you are seen is currency, that the performance of who you are carries as much weight as who you actually are, that going viral is not a side effect of your behavior. In certain spaces, it is the goal. In that world, the most extreme thing you can say in a conflict is the most effective thing you can say. The most outrageous post gets the most attention. The thing that crosses the line everyone can feel is the thing that gets screenshotted a million times. And King Harris, operating from inside that logic, reached for the most extreme thing available to him. He found the grave. He posted it. And it did exactly what extreme content always does on social media. It spread everywhere. It put his name on every platform. It made him the center of the conversation for weeks. By the metrics of the attention economy, it worked. It generated exactly the engagement that posting a murdered woman's grave was designed to generate. The problem is that the attention economy does not have a separate accounting for the human cost of what it rewards. And as long as that reward structure exists, there will be people who reach for the most extreme thing available to them without fully thinking through what that thing actually is or who it belongs to. King Harris is not unique in that impulse. He is just the most visible example of it in this particular moment. And the cost of that visibility is that he now has to live in public with the fact that he made Sabrina Jackson's grave into content. And he has to carry that the way 50 Cent has always carried the loss behind it. Whether King Harris has fully grappled with that cost is something only he knows. Whether the private apology that DJ Academics reportedly has audio of, the development that dropped yesterday and reshaped the conversation yet again, represents a genuine reckoning with what he did, or simply a strategic attempt to de-escalate a situation that was becoming dangerous in dimensions beyond social media, it is a question that does not have a public answer yet. But the fact that there is reportedly audio at all, the fact that something happened behind the scenes that someone felt was important enough to surface, tells you that the private reality of this situation has always been more complicated than the public performance. It tells you that King Harris is a young man who is learning in real time, in public, at enormous cost to his reputation and potentially to his relationships. What it means to fight a war he did not fully understand before he entered it. 50 Cent is still operating. He is still moving. His Broadway production opens on April 25th. His Netflix film is in the pipeline. His television empire continues to produce content that reaches global audiences. He is running 5 simultaneous feuds with the same calm efficiency he has brought to everything he has ever done. The LOL he posted after King Harris put his mother's grave on Instagram was not the end of his response. It was a placeholder, a signal that said, I see you and I am deciding what to do with what you just handed me. Whatever he does with it will arrive on his timeline and in his format and with the full weight of everything he has been building toward since the conversation started in February. That is the only certainty in this story right now. 50 Cent is not finished. Well, he never finishes until he decides to finish. And Sabrina Jackson is still in Rockville Cemetery in Lynbrook, Nassau County, New York. She has been there since 1983. She was 23 years old. She was a mother and she was murdered, and her killer was never found. She is the reason an 8-year-old boy was handed to his grandparents and told to keep moving. She is the reason a man who built an empire from South Jamaica, Queens, responds to the most devastating personal attacks with a cartoon frog and 3 letters. She is the architecture underneath everything, the wound that never closed, the injustice that never found resolution, the mother who should have been there for all of it and was not. That is what they found at 50 Cent's mother's grave after King Harris's video. Not just a headstone, a life that ended too early, a murder that went unsolved. It was a loss that shaped one of the most complex and powerful figures in the history of this culture. In a moment where all of that was turned into content by a 21-year-old who was angry about a photograph and did not fully understand the weight of what he was picking up. The internet was speechless because grief, when it is real and when it is visible and when it is used as a weapon, has a way of cutting through everything else. It cuts through the noise and the trolling and the memes and the diss tracks. It reaches the part of every person watching that knows something about loss and recognizes it even when it is dressed up as beef. That is where we are on March 11th, 2026. The story is not over. The responses are still building. The music is still being made. The silence is still speaking. And somewhere in Nassau County, New York, a grave that should have stayed private is now a part of a story that millions of people are telling about where hip-hop is in 2026. And nobody who has followed this story from the beginning can honestly say they are surprised it ended up here. Not because this was inevitable, but because when you remove all the limits from a conflict, when you decide that nothing is off limits, eventually you reach the thing that should have been the limit all along. The thing that cannot be turned into content without losing something that cannot be recovered. The thing that was never supposed to be here. The grave, the name, the murder, the mother, Sabrina Jackson, Lynbrook, New York, March 11th, 2026, still the center of everything.